I guess for me, my story is I've gone through some heavy stuff sober. I've had to digest some big chunks of truth, not just about myself, but about life on life's terms. Ultimately, I'm left feeling like I'm so grateful to have had the tools of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wouldn't have survived. I wasn't just looking at prison time. I was also drinking on a bleeding ulcer. I was crashing cars right and left. I was trying real hard to die at an early age. In hindsight, I'm so grateful because I know that I wouldn't have had a shot at life. And those times when things have been the hardest, that I picked up the tools instead of picking up a drink or a drug, which I felt like, I wanted to escape and not feel so many times through the hard stuff. Having not done that has made it possible for some of the greatest moments of my life.
Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you're all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. Well, hello, boys and girls. That was the voice of Miss Jennifer Jen E. that you heard at the beginning of this episode today. And she will not say it, but I will. Jen is absolutely legendary here in the North Texas area. She has done so much for so many women and men throughout the area. I just know that you're going to enjoy this episode very much. And Jen has been sober since April 6th of 1997. We start off talking about her, I guess what you would call her reluctancy. Is that a word? Reluctancy? Probably not. She was reluctant, let me just phrase it that way, to come on Sober Speak for a variety of reasons, and we talk about that. One of the most interesting parts to me that I did not know before I brought her on this podcast today, and that is she was a Deadhead, right? One of the Grateful Dead followers, and she was on the way to a Grateful Dead concert. I believe it was in the Missouri area, and she got into some trouble with the law. And I won't ruin that story, but there was a DEA inspection point, and one thing I forgot to ask her, I'm just sitting here singing in my head right now, a Deadhead sticker on a Cadillac. I wonder if she was driving a Cadillac, but I'll have to catch up with her later and ask her that question. So anyway, she'll also talk about her life as a bartender, but before and after Alcoholics Anonymous, and how that changed, as you can imagine. She used to work on 6th Street in Austin, Texas, if you happen to know where that is. And one thing you're not going to want to miss is about the story that she tells of her family and the journey with her family since she has been sober. And this is a story that you will not want to miss, I promise you. Okay, so now a couple little things. First of all, I want to say this. I know, I absolutely realize that there are so many other things you could be doing with an hour or however many minutes you spend listening to this podcast of your time. So I so much appreciate you tuning in to this podcast. And I hope and I pray that by listening to this show, you are able to get a sense of what is possible for yourself, and that you're able to glean some sort of hope from the amazing men and women that share their experience and strength on this podcast. And so that is my hope for you. And, I got to tell you, I was traveling for work a few weeks back, and I was in my hotel room at night, and somebody had written in, and I was replying to that email. And, I just got, I didn't expect to say this as I'm actually recording this introduction, but, I just got a little teary-eyed thinking about all the folks that are out there. And I pray for you guys, and I care for you guys, and I want the best for you, and I want you to be sober 24 hours at a time. And not only do I want you to be sober, I want you to be reasonably happy in this life. And so hopefully, just hopefully, Sober Speak can be a small part of your journey. Now, I have a couple of asks of you. Once again, I've said this before, if any of the speakers have meant something to you, have affected you in a positive way, if you could just stop your device and share either the podcast as a whole or that episode with a friend, I sure would appreciate it. If you're not following me on Instagram, please do such. I'm at @SoberSpeak, all one word. And if you want to get added to our email distribution list, you can text the word sober, SOBER, to 31996. Once again, that's sober to 31996, and the automated response will walk you through that. Okay, now for some listener feedback, and then we will get on to the one and only Miss Jen. All right, so Kathy M. writes in. She says, "Hi, John. Thanks so much for your podcast. I'm an addict working a 12-step program, not alcoholic, but the AA message certainly speaks to me. Your guests offer so much. Their ESH helps me every time I listen." Now, it took me a while, Miss Kathy, to figure out what ESH meant, and I finally figured it out. I'm pretty sure that is experience, strength, and hope. So I know a new acronym. Anyway, she goes on, "I recently heard Arlena and what she said about God, and step 7 hit me really hard in the heart. Humility, surrender, patience, love, all of the qualities I want to allow into my life. God's will, not mine. I'm going to read step 7 for 7 days per Arlena's experience. I trust more will be revealed to me. Thanks to her for sharing her story. I related to so much of it. I had an alter ego similar to Nancy." And she said, "And John, thank you for your service, ! Many blessings, Kathy M. in Chicago." Well, thank you, Kathy M. in Chicago. Sure do appreciate that. And just keep on keeping on out there. And you got me thinking now, when Arlena was sharing on that previous episode, the thing that stuck out to me that she shared was, she said, if you are struggling with God, in all likelihood, you are struggling with someone else's conception of God. And I had never really thought of that. By the way, Arlena is episode number 62. It's called God Loves Me and Everything's Gonna Be Okay. Jackie E. writes in. She says, "Hello, John. Just wanted to reach out and let you know I am still listening and being enriched by your podcast." Smiley face. "I recently listened to John S. Beyond Belief and Arlena A. again and downloaded both of their podcasts. I just want to thank you again for being of such great service. You are truly a 12-stepper, and I mean that as a compliment. Love, love, love you." Jackie E. in Northern California. Well, Jackie E. in Northern California, love, love, love right back at you. We're so glad you're tuning in, and spread the word up there in Northern California for us. Jonathan writes in on Instagram. I love this one. Jonathan is an Al-Anon. That was me speaking. And by the way, Jonathan now writes, "I love your podcast, John. My beautiful boy is 2 years sober, and I am working on my recovery in Al-Anon. Thank you for the message of recovery. My favorite episode is David G. I listen to that weekly. So much to learn in applying steps 1, 2, and 3. And that is David G. Steps 1, 2, and 3 Jonathan is referring to. And but I will say this, Jonathan, that makes my heart light to know two things. Number one, that you have found your stride in the program of Al-Anon. And number two, that your beautiful boy is 2 years sober. That is fantastic. Finally, Jim S. writes in, and Jim says, "Hey, John, I attended a meeting Sunday afternoon in Hendersonville, North Carolina, and I recommended SoberSpeak to the others there. After the meeting broke up, a lady came up to me and said I was the second person to recommend SoberSpeak to her this week. The word is getting around. I really enjoyed Vanessa's talk as a counselor and her yoga, meditation, breathing, relaxation exercise, but I was listening while I was walking in the woods, and I got so relaxed that I walked off the trail and did a face plant into a tree 3 times. Smiley face. Well, my goodness. Anyway, it says, you're making a splash in the community, John. God bless you and for the good you are doing for others, Jim S. Well, I never thought about SoberSpeak being a hazard or a risk to people's health walking in the woods, but I guess it can be. Anyway, go back and listen to that episode if you haven't. It's with Vanessa S. And on Vanessa S's episode, she does a breathing exercise with me, and I was relaxed as well. Now on to the one and only, ladies and gents, Miss Jen E. All right, everybody. So today we are sitting here with Miss Jen E. By the way, do you like to go by Jen or Jennifer?
Jen's good.
Jen?
Jennifer's easier as an introduction just because people don't ask questions.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so we'll go with Jen. This is Jen, short for Jennifer, E. And, when I first started SoberSpeak, probably a little over a year ago now, in the beginning, it was really just about me thinking, I'd like to get some of my friends in here and have them recorded. And then maybe some of my other friends will listen, and this will work out fantastic. Now, it's turned into a little bit more than that. And I'm very grateful for that. But the reason I'm explaining all of that is because Jen was one of the very first people that I thought about having on SoberSpeak. And I actually asked Jen to be on SoberSpeak right at the beginning. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because now we're a little over a year into it. And Jen has finally agreed to come in here, and she's wincing a little bit right now as I'm actually telling this story. So I just thought it'd be good because you're not the only one, right? I mean, people get a little, nervous when you throw a little mic in front of their face and say, hey, go tell your story, and this is going to go out to a lot of people. So,
it's going out to a lot of people?
Well, probably no more than 10 at the most.
Perfect.
Okay. And so I just wanted to talk to Jen about this on the front end and go, because I know she's been tentative about coming in here. But talk to me a little bit about that. What has been your hesitation?
It's a lot of things for me. Initially, when you first asked me, I was in the middle of my busiest year of my life. And I work weekends. My oldest son was wrestling on weekends. I didn't have any weekends to give. And so my initial I'm busy was earnest. But it is true that I have felt a lot of resistance to wanting to do it. And I had to ask myself why I was resistant to it. And ultimately, I am finally here because I finally didn't have I didn't have anything on my calendar that I could say, sorry, I don't have any Saturdays. And I had to I had to have a look at it. Why is it bugging me? So ultimately it comes down to the usual fear and ego, being afraid of putting something out there I can't reel back. Mostly it's just that feeling of being out of control, the usual stuff that makes you feel uncomfortable.
I got you. And you've told your story from the podium, right? Many times.
But it has never been recorded.
Right.
And that changes things for me.
Right. And it's on a microphone. It's a different format. It's on a podcast. You know, a lot of people are just really not familiar with podcasts yet, even though I know you are.
Right.
It's just a matter of, it is a different format.
Yep.
So, well, listen, I appreciate you working through the fear and getting in here. And I wouldn't have been so persistent if I didn't think that what you have to offer to the Sober Speak audience would be so valuable. Now, I have the pleasure of sitting in meetings on a consistent basis now for 10 years or so with Jen during meetings. And so I know that she has a story, and I know that she is articulate, and I know that she works with a lot of women, and I know that a lot of people have benefited from her years in Alcoholics Anonymous. So that's why I wanted to have you in.
I appreciate it. Ultimately, it came down to that for me, to have to be able to say, if it helps one person, it doesn't matter how I feel about it, you know? So I'm glad to be here for that reason.
Well said. All right. So I know you were a bartender.
I was a bartender.
And you were a bartender on 6th Street in Austin.
I was.
And for those who are listening, right, because they're in different countries and such, all those 10 people,
right?
They explain to them what 6th Street is all about in Austin.
Wow, yeah, 6th Street in Austin it's just like the drag in any town, but it's different in Austin just because Austin is A, the capital, and B, a college town, a huge university town.
It's the capital of Texas, just in case folks don't know.
Yep. And so it is where everyone goes. It's where all the bars are, bar after bar after bar. Like lots of live music and partying going on.
And so you were working there, and that's kind of where I think you ended up kind of bottoming out there. Is that correct?
I did. I sobered up behind the bar.
And so what is your sobriety date?
My sobriety date is April 6th, 1997.
April 6th. 1997. So help me with the math there. I'm not sure.
I'll be almost 22.
Wow. That's fantastic.
It's crazy.
So you're legal to drink now. You're 21.
I am. My
sober
sobriety is of drinking age.
So how did you end up in Austin? Were you born there?
No, I was born and raised in Dallas, and I went to college at the University of Arkansas just to get out of Dallas, and because at the time, some family members had told me that A, they would accept me, and B, it was a party town. And I wanted to major in art and photography, and they said they had that major. They had that major, they would take my grades, and it was a party town. So I was excited to get out of here. And it was such a party town that I did not get to stay. But a couple of years, my parents didn't enjoy paying out-of-state tuition for me to party. And so I came back to Dallas. I actually started bartending in Dallas when I came back then. And I was 19. And they were paying me to stay after work and taste beer so that I could be knowledgeable about what I was selling. And
what was the legal age drinking?
It was 21, but you only have to be 18 to be TABC certified to serve.
But I guess technically speaking, if they're having you taste it afterwards,
they
didn't enforce it.
That is some serious gray area. And so I was being paid to stay after work and drink, and I thought, I have arrived, but I didn't. I didn't like being that. I wasn't ready to be back home, and I felt like my style was being cramped, and so I fled for Austin. So I bartended here in Dallas for a bit, and then went down to Austin and got a job on 6th Street.
Did you go down there with anybody, or
I did go down there with somebody. I lived in Dallas with my boyfriend at the time. We moved down there together. And he managed one bar and I bartended at another.
Very nice. So how long did that go on, the bartending thing on 6th Street? And you made good money down there,
Yeah,
right?
I made really good money.
And if you don't spend it all on booze
Right.
and other things, you can actually
Yeah,
enjoy
and when
a
you
good living.
bartend, especially in Austin, there's like a bartender's code. And so bartenders come in, you serve them. So we just like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So we never had a serious tab anywhere we went. And that lasted a few years before I quit drinking. And then I continued to bartend for a few years after I quit drinking.
Okay. So let me take you backwards for a second
Yep.
then. So before you got to 6th Street and University of Arkansas and all that stuff, just tell me what you want to tell me regarding your upbringing and,
Yeah. I was raised in a really seemingly normal family. It was normal to drink. And I say it was a relatively normal family because a lot of people that say, if you say I was raised in a home where everybody was drinking, it sounds like that might be a dark place to be raised, but it wasn't. My family we sat around the table and played cards and played dominoes and everybody drank beer.
conviviality,
It
like
was
the book
conviviality. It was good times most of the time. We had, it didn't come without, some life on life's terms stuff, but it was a pretty generally decent upbringing, nice, good, close family and fun and happy. And I did just, my first drink, I know I was under 8 years old. I know because my parents were still married, and so it was before I was 8. And my uncles, I asked for a sip of beer when everybody was sitting around playing cards, and my uncles thought that it would be cute to see what I thought of beer, and I think they thought I was going to think it was gross, and I did not. And then they thought that was cute, So it's crazy. It sounds crazy to me now. Who I am now, but I started drinking regularly then when I was 11. So I took random sips here and there since I was 8, but I started drinking all the time when I was 11.
How do you, as an 11-year-old, start drinking on a regular basis?
Okay.
Where was the access?
Well, there was some liquor in my house. I would go sneak stuff out of the liquor cabinet, but it was the 80s, and everybody in the 80s left their garage doors open.
Yes.
And everybody kept their beer in the garage fridge. And so we would go from house to house and gank beer from our neighbors.
There you go.
So that, and I also, I know it's Alcoholics Anonymous, but part of my story is I also started smoking pot when I was 11 too. Started drinking beer, drinking regularly, smoking pot, and smoking cigarettes all when I was 11. And I would play hooky from school, 6th grade, so that I could get high.
Wow. So was there anybody else in your family at that time experiencing these things, or were you kind of a black sheep, if you will?
Both. My brother and sister were 4 and 5 years older than me. So in the 80s, it was right after drinking age changed from 18 to 21. So my brother and sister, when I started drinking, were 15 and 16, and they were drinking regularly too. We went to a party school. It was kind of normal. Everybody drank. I really did grow up thinking everybody drank like we did because everybody around us did. And so they were drinking regularly, but I was still the black sheep. Like, they would have booze and they would party, but I was doing stuff like when they left the room, I would grab their flask of like Everclear and just tip it up and chug it as much as I could before anybody else saw what I was doing. So they were drinking and partying, but they were not, mine was escalated.
Understood.
Yep.
So there's then at some point, and you mentioned, and I know this is a podcast that generally speaking, focuses on alcohol.
Right.
And I get it, but I'm not out of the bounds of there's a lot of people who can relate to the drug part. So talk about the drug piece and when you got involved with that. Yeah,
really right away. Also, I started drinking first, but then drugs came up soon after, and it's really funny because it's funny to think about now But when I turned, our book talks about, trying to switch and control it and, try just liquor, just whatever. So my first experience with that was when I was 12. When I went to junior high, I decided to quit hanging out with the friends I was hanging out with and join the FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And I was going to straighten up and fly right. And by that, I mean I was just going to drink. I wasn't going to do drugs anymore. So that's what I did. With every intention of being a good little girl, started athletics, started FCA, and I quit doing drugs. And that lasted until I was about 14. And by the time I turned 14, all the jocks started doing drugs again, too.
And was it a combination? Was there one in particular that you were drawn to in terms of the drug, or was it just all over the map?
Smoking pot was a regular staple. And I actually quit drinking about a year and a half before my sobriety date. And I continued to smoke pot and pop pills. But I did everything else too. Almost everything else. I had a pact with one of my girlfriends who's sober now too. We had a pact that we would not shoot up. We would not shoot up heroin, and we would not smoke crack. And because we both knew then, this was when we were 14, we both knew that we were alcoholics and addicts, and we knew that we would not be able to stop. We knew it would kill us.
Eventually then, I know that I've heard you talk about in meetings before, and I don't want to tell your story, but I know that you really got into some sort of trouble that led you down. I mean, you were facing some time, right?
Yeah.
And what was that about?
Yeah, I got into lots of trouble. Like when I was a teenager, my parents called me Crash because I went through 5 cars before I was 21. I went through 5 cars. I rolled a 4-wheeler. I laid down a moped and had several other accidents before I was 21. But then around that time too, then I got into serious trouble. I traveled with the Grateful Dead when I had time off work.
Really?
So, So we would bartend, we would sock cash away, and we would take some time off of work and go travel around the country and hit a handful of shows and come back home and start working again. And one time I was on the way to a show in St. Louis, Missouri, and I was driving down the highway, and there was a sign, a big flashing sign on the side of the highway that said DEA inspection 1 mile. And so I did what anybody with a car full of goods would do, and I freaked out and pulled off the highway. And I took the first exit, with my heart in my shoes, and there was a roadblock on the exit.
So, you think they'd seen that before,
yeah,
right?
It was a sting. Like, there was nowhere you needed to pull off there. It wasn't a gas station. There was nowhere to go. So anybody who took the exit was because they saw the sign that said DEA. So
do they still have those on the road?
Know.
DEA?
I wouldn't know now. So yeah, I took the exit and had like an out of body experience because I was so terrified. I just saw myself like fleeing, and I didn't. I had.
Were you with anybody, or
I was with my boyfriend. I was driving, and we knew that because it was my car that I was going to go down, and I knew that I needed someone to bail me out. So I told the cops it was all mine, everything that we had. So they searched the car. They asked to search the car. I said no. They said, we'll be back with a search warrant. And I said, oh, whatever, and let them search it. So I had a ton of stuff because we were packed to see several shows. And I, had the fear of running out of anything. So I would make sure I had tons of stuff. And so I had a ton of all different kinds of stuff in my car. And they took it. They gave me a log of evidence. They took my picture and let me go. And that night, we made it to the Dead show in St. Louis, and the Grateful Dead encored with I Fought the Law. And one of the most serendipitous moments of my life, I sat next to, out in the lawn of this huge amphitheater, randomly sat next to an attorney from Austin. It was very strange, a strange turn of events. But I didn't hear anything back from it for a long time. I'm trying to think of the timeline. It was probably at least a couple years. By that time, I had quit drinking, but I hadn't sobered up because I knew alcohol was the problem, but I was not ready to be sober.
So when you had sobered up, were you going to AA or were you just doing it on your own?
I was just dry. I just knew I had to quit drinking. So I quit drinking, but forget being sober. I wasn't going to come to AA because those people don't drink. I just wasn't ready to be sober. So I really thought alcohol was the problem. I thought if I quit drinking, everything would be okay. And it took a while for me to figure out that wasn't right. But I just one day got a letter in the mail, and the return address said St. Louis, Missouri, correctional facility or something. I can't remember what it was. St. Louis, something official, and my heart just sank, and I knew that it was a letter that said I was looking at 14 years in prison for possession.
And it took them 2 years
Almost
to catch
2 years.
up with that.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
So at this point, are you still with the same boyfriend?
I was. And it was coming... It was all, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, because for my part, I needed a criminal attorney, and he, was with me, and it was half his stash, and I felt like we needed to talk to our parents to get me help to stay out of prison, and he was unwilling to let anybody to ask for help. And so just kind of left me hanging with the whole deal. And it was just, it was the straw that broke the camel's back in a way that I had been not drinking for 18 months, but I was dry, and I was, self-righteous and holier than thou, and getting mad at him when he was getting drunk every night still, And so I was, what I know now is if I don't drink and I don't have a program, I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. So I had about, a year and a half there of being restless, irritable, and discontent and blaming it on him. And when he wouldn't ask for help to help me stay out of prison, it was the end of it. And he got up and left. He told one of our best friends that he felt like he had to choose between me and alcohol. And there's a lot of other stuff that led up to it too. We had also 6 months prior lost one of our best friends to suicide, a friend that couldn't stay sober, and so things just hadn't been happy in a while. And so he said he felt like he had to choose between me and alcohol. And I woke up one morning and he was throwing his stuff in a trash bag and out of there. And that is not my sobriety date, but it's the first time I went to a meeting. That was April 1st, 97. I went into a meeting because I was left in a puddle on the floor, in clear recognition that I had no one left to blame and I needed help.
So that's April 1st, 97.
Yep.
Your sobriety date is April 6th.
That's right. So I went in on the 1st, and I just felt, I was a mess, and I felt like I was having a nervous breakdown, and my life was crumbling around my ears, and I took a Valium that was not prescribed to me. Right. And so that was on the 6th. Yeah. That was actually, I came in on the 1st when it was all coming to a head, and he left on the 6th, and I took a Valium that day. That's the last time I've had anything that wasn't prescribed to me.
Wow. Okay. So now you are, this is just 5 days later, right?
Yeah.
You're facing 14 years in prison.
Yes.
Take me from there.
Yeah, so I had a really intense experience with the third step, because I feel like I really did my third step in front of a judge. And by that I mean I had I don't know, I can't remember if it was 60 or 90 days sober when I ended up having to go in front of the judge.
Is that in Missouri? Or
Yeah.
So you had to drive up
I had
there?
to go to Missouri.
Was anybody with you?
My sweet, forgiving dad took me out there, and we acted like it was like a weekend getaway. And went and saw the sights, and then went and hung my head in front of the judge. And it was a experience with a third step, because like the girl in front of me got 2 years probation for bouncing a check. And so I just knew that I was about to do some time. And I had been earnestly working the steps with a sponsor, and I was all in AA. And I had to go up there and really earnestly say to myself, okay, God, if I'm supposed to go to prison, I'm willing to go. It's obviously not what I want to happen with my life. But if I'm supposed to go be some big bad bitch, I'll do it. And I stood in front of the judge, and he gave me 2 years probation. Same as that girl that bounced a check or wrote a hot check. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
All right, so hold on just a second. We'll
Yep.
be continuing our conversation with Jen E. in just a moment. Just a reminder, you're listening to Sober Speak. You can find us on the web at www.soberspeak.com. There you'll find a back catalog of other episodes you can listen to for free. You'll also find the donate button on our website. If the Spirit moves you to do so, you can click on that. Please keep in mind this podcast is funded by you, the listener. Sober Speak is a self-supporting organization through our own contributions. We are not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. We do not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorse nor oppose any causes. Now back to Jenny. Okay, so you get in front of the judge. It was a he, right?
Yep.
Gives you 2 years probation. What did you and your dad do after that? Were you celebratory?
Yeah, we were elated. I felt like I just can't even explain how thankful I was, like grateful to God, and how relieved I was, because I just knew that it had all caught up with me. I'd had a lot of trouble. It said I went through 5 cars and all that stuff before. One of them was one of them was a DWI. One of them was blacking out and wrecking into a brick wall. I had a lot of reasons that I felt like it had all caught up with me, and that I deserved what I was going to get. So it felt like grace.
Okay, so a lot of people would use, so at this point, people, generally speaking, I should say, will go one of two ways. Either they will see it as grace and get plugged in more to Alcoholics Anonymous or wherever they're getting plugged into, and start to give back, so to speak. And then other people will say, oh, wow, the heat is off, and now I can go back and drink again and get back to my life. But obviously, you went the latter.
I was done. My friend, I mentioned our best friend had killed himself, and I had watched him do probation and not be able to stay sober. And he kept having to go do UAs, like pee in a cup, right? And it comes back dirty. It kept happening. And having watched him go through that, when I knew that I was looking at prison time, it was so obvious to me that I wanted to be done myself before a judge told me I had to be, because I was afraid if somebody told me I had to be, that I would rebel against it. I knew that I needed to do it for me, and I did. I was all in by the time that happened. I had people from Alcoholics Anonymous actually write me letters of recommendation. I had my bosses write me letters of recommendation, family members write me letters of recommendation for that deal, and because I was sincerely done.
Did you have a lawyer, or was it just you?
I hired a good lawyer who played golf with the judge.
Good. That helps too, right? Little serendipity there as well. Yep. All right. Okay, so all right, so now you're an alcoholic. By the way, getting back to that boyfriend, or did he ever surface again? Or
nope. We went our separate ways. It was, and you hear in AA people say you got to change playgrounds and playmates, and I really at first thought, oh, that's not going to happen. I've been friends with these people since like junior high. These are my people. And it did happen. He ended up with all my friends in the split because my behavior changed. I wasn't willing to keep doing the same things I had been doing. And he ended up with my friends, and I ended up with the whole new batch of homies in AA.
So take me through that first year in Alcoholics Anonymous. What was it like? The first time through the steps, just all your memories that you have from that time.
Well, that would be a lot.
Well, not all.
Yeah,
a portion of your memory.
So my first meetings, I remember they did much like we do at our group, where they passed a newcomer packet with all the phone numbers, and the women huddled up around me. Austin AA was really good at the time. And there was some lady that I had heard her speak in the meeting about being on the marijuana maintenance program. And she wrote next to her name, call anytime. And I knew that I was bartending and, getting off work at 2, 3 in the morning, and I may actually need to call anytime. So I asked that lady to sponsor me. So you continued bartending after you got sober, right? I was still bartending. And I became a good bartender because I was willing to cut people off, and I learned about cash register honesty in AA, and I became a much better, an honest person. I became that person behind the bar. A good employee. You would think that it would be looked at like a good employee, but my bosses didn't necessarily like it because I wasn't leading the party anymore. It was fully condoned to party there, and it was hard for me not to be taking shots with everybody and being a part of the party and, an instigator. And they weren't really excited about me becoming a square. Yeah, so square. My first year in AA, it does come down to a lot of I think about being in the bar a lot because that's where I put the tools to action. Also, other than behind the judge or in front of the judge, behind the bar, I put the tools to work. There were a lot of times it would be that situation. Like one time in particular, my boss asked me to make like 10 shots of this drink I had invented. You invented one? I did. I had invented a drink. It was called oh, it's so funny. It was called the Gin Daisy. Because my name's Jen, and it was Daisy was my favorite. So flower. Not like, and it was gin, Gin, yeah. Got okay. So, man, that was a good drink, and it became a favorite of a lot of people at the bar. And he, one night asked me to make like 10 of them, and they were not happy that I wasn't making one for myself. And it was an interesting time, and that stuff was uncomfortable and hard, and it was hard to just not bend my elbow and take one. But I went into the walk-in cooler, I went into the bathroom a lot and hit my knees and prayed and asked God, for help. Real surrender kind of helped me and stayed sober. Wow. So, I know that you are a photographer, right? Yep. And were you, and you don't bartend anymore. So there was at some point. I was also shooting at the time too. I was shooting and bartending, but I wasn't shooting enough to pay the bills. So, I would work down in Austin for a little place called Phototech. It was my first professional photography gig, and we shot frat parties. We shot a lot of graduations. We shot proms. We just shot everything. Yeah, at some point, bartending was just not conducive to. I met my husband in AA. Bartending wasn't conducive to getting married and having a family, that kind of thing.
So you mentioned your husband there. So that you got sober in 1997. When did you meet?
And he came into AA in January of 98, and we started hanging out in February of 98.
Gotcha. And then how long was it before you guys got married?
Let's see. We started hanging out at the beginning of February of 98. We moved back to Dallas together that summer. And we got married, well, we got married in 2000. We also had our first kid in 2000. So
okay, so you have 2 children, right?
Yep.
Okay, talk to me a little bit about your family.
Yeah, we had we got engaged. We moved back up to Dallas to be with our family, and we switched home groups, and we discovered that was difficult, you know. And so we had a wedding planned and everything, and we ended up calling it off. It ended up putting it on hold, but at the time it seemed like calling it off. And then the whole I talked a little bit about restless, irritable, and discontent, right? So we moved home groups and things weren't exactly the same.
When you said you moved home groups, are you talking about in Dallas? You were going from one home group to another?
We lived in
Austin.
Austin. Yeah, we lived in Austin. That's where our home group was. We were plugged in. We had, our people, and we were young and didn't grasp how hard leaving your home group would be. So we moved up to Dallas. We started going to a new group, and it just wasn't the same. We weren't doing it right. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the same people. And I think we both got a little off the beam. We were still going to meetings, but I think we got a little off the beam, and we let the little relationship stuff of when you first move in with somebody and you don't like exactly how they do everything, we let it start picking at us. So we ended up getting cold feet, calling it off. And we realized real quick that we didn't want to do that, and we made up. We were both just wrecked about it and made up, and promptly got pregnant with our first kid. And that's Christian, and we found out about halfway through that pregnancy that he was going to be disabled. We knew that he had.
How did you find that out?
We had our first sonogram when they were going to tell us if it was a boy or a girl. They couldn't tell what he was. And we didn't know that was weird. They sent us to a secondary sonogram. We didn't know that was strange. And it turns out that his legs were twisted up in a way that were covering himself, so they couldn't tell what he was. And that's when they told us that he was disabled, basically, that his legs were deformed. They thought his arms were too. They made us do a lot of testing. They thought that he might die, actually. They thought he had a disorder called trisomy 13 or 18, and they thought that they thought he might not live at all. And so I had to do tests to find out if that was the case. And we were terrified and had to wait about 2 weeks for any results to come back. And that's another real experience with being powerless and having to turn the most important thing over. And we were terrified. We did some research at the time. Even I'm old. The internet was really preliminarily getting, we had dial-up to look for research on what was going on with our baby. And we waited about 2 weeks, and the doctor that delivered him, I knew personally, he came to my office where I was working and stuck his head in the door and gave me the thumbs up that he didn't have that. And we then went from being terrified that we were going to have a disabled kid to we get to have a disabled kid, Oh. We were just so happy that he was going to live.
Oh, God bless you.
So he was born in March of 2000, and he since has been a constant example to me that I don't know what's best for myself, because I just wouldn't have ordered that to happen that way. And at the same time, he's just exactly the way he's supposed to be.
So he's 18 or 19 years old.
He's 18, and he, that kid that was born like really with his little legs looked like curly fries. He was under 5 pounds, and he just had little curly fries for legs. And he came out of the hospital at 5 days. We were at the Scottish Rite when he was 7 days, and we went for years. We went for the first year, we went almost 5 days a week, then 3 days a week, then 2 days a week. He had a bunch of surgeries, countless hours of PT. And
what were the surgeries and the PT about? Were they trying?
He was born with really severe club feet, and he was born with a disorder called arthrogryposis, which is basically means stiff joints. So his joints are kind of fused. So that he had to have a bunch of surgeries just to be able to walk.
Is that just the lower body or the?
I said they thought his arms were malformed also, but right before he was born, they did another sonogram and said, "Oh, look at that! His arms straightened out." And so it was, mostly his legs were the issue. So he had a hip out of place, and they kind of had to build him a hip. He had several surgeries on his feet, or he had surgery on both feet twice, and was in a full body cast for 3 months over his first birthday. And he did, tons of PT just to be able. We didn't know if he was going to be able to walk. They told us they didn't know. They said, he may walk, he may not walk. He may walk and then not walk. And I was like, you could say I don't know. So this kid, we didn't know if he would walk. We worked so hard for him to be able to step up a curb. He actually is a collegiate athlete right now, wrestling for Colorado Mesa University.
Wow.
Yeah. So he didn't he walks. He doesn't walk quite like everybody else, but he, we came to know him really early as not disabled, but just differently abled. He learned to crawl with his head, and he army crawled, and he could do a full press on a table when he was like 5 years old. He's lean and mean. He's a tough kid.
And he's a college athlete now.
He's a college athlete, yeah.
He wrestles, right?
Yep.
Oh, that's absolutely fantastic.
It's awesome.
Okay, so when did your other son come along?
He came 9.5 years later.
Wow.
We had we actually lost a little girl along the way. When Christian was 3, we were pregnant with a little girl.
So let me back up there real quick.
Yeah.
So having had that experience with your youngest, were you tentative about having another child?
Yeah, so that's why they're 9.5 years apart. So we sought genetic counseling. They told us they didn't think it would happen again, and we tried again. And when I was about 5 months pregnant, our little girl died. They couldn't give us clear reasons why, but they said that they thought that she was disabled too. And Christian at the time was 3 and still doing surgeries and still trying to walk. And, he didn't take his first steps till he was almost 3. So he was still just trying to walk. He still used a wheelchair all the time. I just felt like I didn't know if we could be doing 2 kids doing surgeries. And so we just decided we were going to be a 1-kid family and be, grateful for what we've got. And yeah, you and I have this thing, I think, about the acceptance page, right? I know the acceptance page, sometimes I've heard you share that sometimes a little bit of it rubs you wrong. And I had a couple of years where the acceptance page made me completely crazy because it was really hard to accept that, having a baby die. It really shook what I thought I had a really solid foundation in AA. I had a solid spiritual life, and I thought I had a solid conception of God. And when that happened, I got really shaken. And that whole absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake made me want to punch people when I heard it for about 2 years after that. And I ultimately had to completely rethink my conception of God before I could move on, because for a while there after that, I didn't feel like I had a God that I could trust to turn my life over to. Trusting God became really difficult for me after that for a while. And so we didn't have our other son until 9.5 years after our first son, because a lot to do with that. And we in 2007 I lost my dad suddenly to a heart attack, he was my, right-hand man. I worked with him. We were together all the time, and he was Christian's biggest cheerleader, and we were all together all the time, and it was sudden and shocking. And I bring that up just to say that I was having to meditate all the time just to stay sober and sort of sane. After that, I was desperate, and I was working my ass off in Alcoholics Anonymous not to drink over that. And during that time, during meditation and stuff like that, I felt my heart open to the idea of having another kid, which was really weird. And it felt obvious that it wasn't my plan, because I thought it was a bad idea to give up sleep again, and I didn't want to have a kid on a planet without my dad on it. And it became real obvious that I was being led, because all my reasons were, this is a terrible idea, but it just felt right. And so we talked about it. We talked about maybe adopting, and ultimately we came down to the decision that if we were meant to have two disabled kids, we were meant to have two disabled kids. And Christian was at that time 9.5 and way more independent, and we could see that he was going to be okay. And he had been begging for a sibling, and he was wrecked when we lost the one in 2003. And so we just went for it, and we got Henry, who is physically capable in spades. Yeah.
So how's Henry fared through all of this? I guess here's what I'm thinking about is that, with all the challenges that Christian presented, has Henry just kind of fallen in?
Yeah, he never even noticed it. Like, he never even noticed that Christian was different, because he wasn't different to him. And we noticed when Henry first started learning to run, he was a toddler. And I mean, he was just blowing and going from jump. And he started running, and we noticed watching him run that he was like lifting his arms up when he runs. I know you can't see what I'm doing, but he lifted his arms high when he ran, like his arms were bent up, and he was moving his arms back and forth really fast, like for momentum to make him run. And we just couldn't, like, for a while, we couldn't figure it out. We're like, what is he doing? Why does he run like that? And then we one day, looked over and realized that's how Christian runs. Christian ran like that. He used his arms for momentum, because his legs didn't have muscle and his joints were stiff. So he used his arms to kind of hike him up to be able to move fast. And so, that's what Henry learned. Henry wants to be just like his big brother still does. We had to explain to him that Christian was different. The first times it came up, when we started talking about everybody being born different and some people are different, and I would say, kind of like Christian's legs are a little bit different, and Henry would be like, what? No. He didn't even notice.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. We're getting to the end of time here,
Yeah.
right? And what have we left on the table that you want to make sure that you get out in regards to your story and whatever you would want to share with a newcomer just starting down this path?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, my story is I've gone through some heavy stuff sober, and I've had to digest some big chunks of truth, not just about myself, but about life on life's terms. And ultimately, I'm left feeling like I'm so grateful to have had the tools of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wouldn't have survived. I wasn't just looking at prison time. I was also drinking on a bleeding ulcer. I was crashing cars right and left. I was trying real hard to die at an early age, so I don't think I would have survived. But I'm the type of person that I could get in fights with coat hangers in my closet, right? Like, my shirt won't come off the hanger and I'll just freak out because my shirt is just coming up. And so for somebody that couldn't even, get dressed in the morning without having a full-blown freak out, to be able to walk through actual real life hard stuff and stay sober it's miraculous to me. And not just sober, but reasonably happy in spite of it, and with the capability of having a new attitude and outlook. None of those things are possible without continuously picking up the tools, and some days I think I don't want to have to work so hard to be normal, and early on I would have thought I don't want to go to AA for the next 20 however many years, but in hindsight I'm so grateful, because I know that I wouldn't have had a shot at life. And those times when things have been the hardest, that I picked up the tools instead of picking up a drink or a drug, which I felt like, I wanted to escape and not feel so many times through the hard stuff. And having not done that has made it possible for some of the greatest moments of my life to happen. Some of the greatest moments ever have happened way after the hard stuff, and I would have given up and not been present and gotten to see some of the most amazing stuff in life. So I'm just left with gratitude on a regular basis that I have the tools, whether stuff is going good or stuff's going bad. I'm eternally grateful and indebted to Alcoholics Anonymous for giving me, not just saving my life, but giving me a life that's worth living.
That's right. We always say, and I know you've heard this many times before, is that, for example, both Jen and I are not, we don't represent AA, but we are examples that Alcoholics Anonymous does work in people's lives. And you had me tearing up during this interview, Jen. I appreciate. See, that wasn't that hard, was it?
No, it wasn't that hard. But I'm not going to listen to it either.
Oh, you'll have to listen to it. I can already tell you it's going to be good. Will you hand me that big book that's sitting right there next to you? Thank you. As you can tell, we just do all this stuff on the fly here in the Sober Speak studio. All right, so this is page 164 from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us, like me and Jen, as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. If you need to reach out to me, I'm at john@soberspeak.com or feedback@soberspeak.com. They go to the same place. Jen, thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure.